Hello, everyone. Welcome to another meetup today. Woo! How's everybody doing? Feeling A-okay? Little mini check-in. Everyone's doing all right?
Good.
Good.
It's fully fall in the Pacific Northwest.
That's a
That's what I
mighty,
heard.
that's a mighty comfortable sweater you're wearing there too. What's the weather over there?
It's sweater weather.
In
Like,
Portland.
Sorry,
I
go
think it
ahead.
was 48 when I woke up this morning.
Surprisingly, it's warmer in New York right now.
Man, 48 as a San
From
Diegan.
from 80 last weekend.
Yeah, when I left to go to LA, it was 80. And then when I got to LA, it was like 90. So I think I'm in for a shock when I go back.
It's cooled down a little bit. Today's, well, at least in San Diego, right now it's overcast. So it's about probably high 70s. I haven't checked it yet. So it's all good. All right, but welcome to another TCL-47 meetup. I will, oh, sorry, I didn't double check, but Jen, did you want to MC this time or you want me to go through? How do you want to, I forgot to touch
Doesn't matter.
base.
You can go ahead and MC if you'd like.
Okay, so today, let's see, make sure I have all my tabs. We will go over the demos with the two teams, and then after that, I will explain a little bit more about pair programming, and then kind of get everyone's intake of that, their experience, because it's been about 3 weeks since we've kind of done some sort of pair programming. So I would love to see and hear your input, and then we'll take any other questions after that. Sounds good with everybody? Are you okay? All right, awesome. So who would like to demo first? Anyone? Ooh. All right, Weston.
I suppose I will. Okay, so this week, Tina and I worked on issue number 6. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. All right, you see my screen? And for issue 6, we were supposed to make a filter to look through the items. So the high level was allowing users to search through their list to cut down on clutter. And then the acceptance criteria is it's going to go at the top of the list view. We want a semantic label so that you can click on it and it'll refocus to the input field. And then we want a reset button to conditionally render if there's text in the field. And then finally, the filter text should match any part of the item's name. So forcing to lowercase and if it's in the middle of the word. And the other thing was we wanted it to filter on the fly. So as the user's typing, it filters. So we can go ahead and look at the component itself. So this is our list view, and you can see that we have our test list loaded in, and all of those list items are rendering. It's very beautiful. And then at the top here, we have this new component called, well, that's labeled as filter list items. So if we click on our label, you can see that our focus changes to the field here. And let's say that we want to look for our shirt. If we type in shirt, you can see that as we start typing, those items come up and we're getting both our uppercase shirt and our lowercase shirt. Let's say I forgot my G and type in garlic. We still get our garlic. And then finally, we wanted to provide users with some sort of feedback if their search didn't result in anything. I don't think that there's pizza on our list. So if I type in pizza, you see that we get where we would expect to see our results. We're instead getting some text feedback that just says, sorry, no items match your search. And you'll notice on the right, there's no kind of reset button, but as I start to type, that reset button shows up. And if we click it, it clears this clears the text there, and we get all of our items back. So let's go ahead and dive into the code and see how this is working here. Well, that's going to be annoying. Okay, so this is our list component, and you might notice a couple of new things. One, we're going to go ahead and use state to store the search term as we're searching. So you can see that we have our search term and set search term. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. We should look at where the form is first. So down in our return statement, above where all of our data is being rendered, we have a new form. And the first part of that is handling the submit in case the user presses enter. So we have our prevent default here as the only thing that's happening with that. You can see that we have our semantic label for search term to redirect the focus. And then we're passing in the value from state. Well, that's being shared so that you know, if the user were to refresh or something, that would still be there. And then we have a placeholder to say start typing here. And finally, when we say on change or on change, the on change is equal to on search. So as the user starts to type, we are setting the search term with the target value. A couple of things that we ran into here. Oh, sorry. And then we have our reset button. So if there's a search term, then we render that. And a couple of things that we ran into here were prior to having the on submit actually handled, we were, if the user pressed enter, they might expect for it just to filter, but instead it was refreshing the entire screen. And so state was being reset, the whole list was coming back. So it seemed like it was resetting, but in fact it was refreshing the whole screen. So that's how we put that in there. And then for the button, we gave it a type reset, and it just sets the search term back to an empty string. So that's how we handled that. And then a couple of other decisions that we made. You can see that we are conditionally rendering here as well. We're either rendering our filtered list of items, or we are rendering that no items match your search. So if the length of our filtered data is not 0, and there is a search term, that means that we have no items that match our search, and this will render. Otherwise, we are rendering through our filtered data, or we are mapping through our filtered data. And initially, we handled our filtering here in the return statement. So we had, pardon me, we had this functionality down in the return statement, and we're just handling it all on the fly there. However, we wanted to be able to reuse this code to determine whether or not, or which of these things was being conditionally rendered. So we opted to pull that code out and create a variable up here called filtered data. So we're passing in the data from our destructured props here, and then we're filtering it, and we're passing an item, and then we're forcing the name property within that item to lowercase, and then we're checking to see if it includes the search term, our user inputted search term, which is also forced to lowercase. So that's how the actual filtering is being done, and then that whole resulting array is being passed here, and we're mapping through it to render our items. And that, I think that covers what we talked about. Oh, sorry, one more thing is we had one more issue, and that was that when this view initially loaded, it was for a split second flashing no items match your search. And that's because the length of the array was initially 0. So Tina had the idea we added this OR operator here. So either there is a link to the filter data, or there's no, or there's a search term. So that handled that quite nicely. So now when it loads, we don't really see anything until the list renders.
Good job, you guys. Nice, nice. I really like, you know, as a mom and a grocery shop person, sometimes I do use uppercase and lowercase when I put in like random items for the list. So I really like how the two lowercase, so it doesn't matter the input of the user when they entered it and then when they search it. And I'm a terrible speller, so I really like that it's not just exact match, but it has some of those letters and it pre-populates what the computer thinks that items is. So that your RLIC was really great. It's because I know me, I was like, how do I spell something again? And if I'm missing a letter and if it doesn't find it, then I thought I didn't, you know, put it in the list. So it's really cool that you have that feature in there. So well done. Any questions, comments, concerns with the demo currently? Anyone?
I really liked how he outlined kind of the bugs basically they initially faced throughout the development cycle. So I think I've been enjoying that so far with all of the demos, because it really helps so that if the other group or anybody else gets stuck with the same issue in the future, you're like, oh yeah, I can just go back and look at the recording and see what they said about that, because I think they ran into the same issue. So that is an excellent, excellent display of kind of code communication for the whole team to kind of learn together and lift each other up. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the feedback.
All right, who is taking the lead for that for the next demo?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and introduce our issue, and then Arnika will talk about the code. So we'll go ahead and grab the screen here. So we had issue number 5, which was, as a user, I want to join an existing shopping list so I can share a shopping list with another person. So we wanted someone to be able to join the list if they have the token or the list name. So they can enter in the list name. If that list exists, they're able to join that existing list, essentially, to summarize it. The acceptance criteria was if the user doesn't have if the user doesn't already have a token, the form allows the user to enter a token to join an existing list. So we added a form to our homepage, which we'll show to you shortly. In addition, that button allows me to create a new list as well. The input that accepts the list token has a semantic label element associated with it. So if you like click on the name, it's going to go to enter into the input. The user can submit this form with both the mouse and the enter key. If the list exists, the token is saved into local storage and the user is redirected to the list and shown the items. If it doesn't exist, the user is shown an error message that explains the problem. And if they do already have a token, they're just automatically redirected to the list view. I'm actually gonna, like I said, let Arnika take the lead on doing the code. She did the brunt of it this week, and so.
And shout out to Weston. He helped me, so thank you.
Oh, thank you, Weston.
Okay, let me demo how it works. Alrighty, can you see my screen? Perfect. Okay, so here, the user should be able to enter the list name. So first I'll do a list name that I know doesn't exist, which is your shopping. And since it doesn't exist, they'll receive an alert. And then let's enter a list name that does exist. And then it takes them to their shopping list. So that's just a quick demo of how it works. And then to move on to the code for this week. All right, so as mentioned first, we had to create a form which would allow the user to be able to enter a list name. We first created the label and then did the input. And in order to allow the user to be able to click the label and it focuses in on the input, we had to give the input the ID of join list, which was also the HTML4 within the label. So that's what connects the two. And then also to allow for a user to be able to either use the enter key or the button to be able to submit the list name. We used on submit. And then for the function for this, it was titled handle submit, which would, let's see, okay, which would allow us to be able to check whether or not the list name that was entered, whether or not it existed in the database. So this is the code that Weston actually helped us with. He created a function which would allow to be able to verify whether or not the list name that was entered already existed. So for this, he created or did a query to the Firestore, which would check whether or not the list ID or the list name, whether or not it existed. And then it also checked to see whether or not that specific collection had a length of 1 or greater, which means that there was a item already added to the list. And then if so, that's how it verifies whether or not the that list exists within the database. So that was the nifty function that he created to be able to help with this. And then as mentioned, if that token or list name already exists, then it would navigate to the user's list, or else it would create the alert, which lets them know that this list does not exist. And I believe that's it. That's all I have.
Woohoo, good job. And thank you, Weston, for helping out with, the teammates. So I think I forgot to mention this, earlier. So if you all run into any issues, yes, the mentors are here, but you could always reach out to your other teammates as well, because the whole point of this is collaboration and we work together as a team. So don't feel like, oh no, this is my partner today, I can't reach out to, the opposite team. And no, that's definitely reach out. You could also brainstorm if you ever run into any hiccups or what we call roadblocks, and then, to talk it through. So good job, Arniqua, on explaining it. And thank you so much for Mariah demonstrating it, talking about the ticket. So I forgot to mention, I really like how the team is demoing by showing the acceptance criteria, the instructions first before demoing it. So sometimes in some companies, you have people who doesn't know how to code, like line of business people come in and watching the demo to see how it functions. And it's a really great show to demonstrate, like, hey, this is kind of what we worked on. This is what the instruction and acceptance criteria, and then you move on to the demonstration. So, if someone doesn't know anything about code, they're like, okay, this is what they're looking for, like a list, a filtered list, X, Y, and Z. And then when you demonstrate it, and of course, the developers will understand the code, but then when you show the functionality, the line of business people who may not be very familiar with it, they're like, oh, okay, it kind of does what it the group was sent out to do. So good job on showing that. So thank you so much for that. And any questions, concerns of the recent demo?
I love the helper function, pulling that functionality out to like something that is named, and that this is verifying if the list token works. Excellent job. Anybody else going into the code base will know exactly what the heck this is supposed to be doing. The other great thing I noticed is everyone is taking the magic numbers comment to heart. And I noticed that the minimum docs or something like that was labeled as a constant. Excellent. Makes my heart sing. So really good job with the code quality this week, y'all. So good job.
Woohoo. All right, so this will be a perfect segue. Oh, sorry, anyone else have any comments? Shout out. before I move on. All right, I don't see anything. All right, so I will take the silence as everyone's good to go. So I will segue into now the pair programming module. So give me a second. Let me know if you can see my screen okay. All right, awesome. So the past few weeks, I am hoping that everyone have had a chance to do a little bit what's called pair programming. I know in the beginning, I believe it was Jen, or maybe it was Viet, mentioned about or maybe someone else, I can't remember, sorry, about the feature of VS Code, how they can share the IDE with another partner virtually. So that's kind of the similar concept about pair programming. So the concept of pair programming is when as you can read here, the two developers sit together in front of a computer, take turns writing code using just one keyboard. I am very new to the field, so I've been doing my pair programming virtually. I had to kind of ask my husband, he's been a developer for a few years, and before, it was done virtually, basically for what he explained to me, his experience was a developer will kind of walk up to someone's computer, and then that person, which is the driver, will kind of show either the problem that they're having or an issue. So you're wondering, what is the driver? So the driver is as it says, it's the main person. So right here, it's written, controls the keyboard and is responsible for writing the code they need in order to complete the task. This person will try to verbalize their thinking process as much as possible as they code, thinks low level about the code. So that is, sitting in the seat, having their keyboard. My husband liked to say, usually it's the person, they have their environment set up. They have shortcuts on their keyboard because that's the most comfortable environment. So the navigator is probably the person who comes up to that person trying to help that driver. So a navigator is a person who pays close attention to the code the driver is writing, offering guidance, suggestions, alternatives, finding answers to upcoming questions and challenges, and acting as a sounding board for the ideas the driver is coming up with, and thinks with a bird eye view. Sorry, this is this. Yeah. So bird's eye view of the code. So basically, think of it when a person drives. Back in the day, we had physical maps, paper maps. So the navigator would just kind of, look at the map and then give directions to the driver, especially if the driver is not familiar with the area that they're driving into. So that's the bigger picture of this pair programming. So the driver will show the code, what they're running into, and the navigator will be like looking at that code, seeing what the driver is doing, and just kind of either ask questions or come up with solutions to a problem. Okay, so now pairing remotely is pretty much the same. So we have a graph, not a graph, a slide here that shows that two developers hop on a video or a screen share call. And then the driver screen share the codes, and while the navigator provides feedback and asks questions. Typically, the driver pushes the code to a remote repo and the navigator pulls that code down locally. So this is another important aspect because it might work on the driver side, but then it may not work on the navigator side. So it's probably a good practice where the driver would push the code to a remote repo, that specific branch, and the navigator on their end can pull it just to see, does it work on their environment? Does it work? And if it does, that means so far so good. If it doesn't, then there's like another issue they have to discuss and figure out, why isn't it working? It's working on, for example, on Weston's computer, but it's not working on Armiqua. Why? So that's a good kind of seeing, okay, figuring out what they have to do to make it work for both, because you want the code to work before it goes into that production branch. And then that gets next to the driver navigator swap roles. For me personally, I like to be the navigator. I really get nervous when I'm on screen sharing code, but it's really good practice also to be that driver. So from my experience, I've been pairing remotely with friends or other tech people in the other tech communities. So my pair programming experience is more of the unprofessional setting, because it's me and a friend trying to figure out like a coding challenge. And that's how I've been pair programming. So a friend will share screen, and then we will try to figure out, leak code, code wars, X, Y, and Z. So I don't really have that much experience, but after these slides, I would love to hear Jennifer's professional experience from a work point of view. All right, let's go to the next slide. So mindset and attitude. Pairing is an exercise in sharing your Legos. So basically, think of it like sharing your toys. These are the tools. What can we do to build together? So it can be more efficient to go with your pairing partner's idea than to argue an approach. I love to learn new things. So I'm always awed and amazed when I do my pair programming and my friend shows me, oh, certain syntax or methods to conquer, or to fix the problem. And then I'm always asking questions like, oh, that's cool. Can you tell me more about that? Can you teach me more? And then that helps the driver, because does the driver really know what they're doing? And then if they do, they could explain it really well, and it solidifies their knowledge of the concept as well. So for pair programming, I want everybody to go in with a beginner's mindset, embrace the doubt and possibility. It's not about teaching or mentorship. It's about collaboration, working together as a team. It's an opportunity to learn, and then driver seeks agreement before proceeding, and navigator ask, but don't tell. So don't think of the navigator to be like the backseat driver. Go this, do that. It's more of, oh, okay, why are you doing this? Oh, that's really cool. Can you tell me more? Or it's like, I have an idea. Can we try my, method out as well to see if it works? And then that helps out, because the driver may not see that that alternative answer. So I really enjoy pair programming. So I'm gonna take a mini pause, and I would kind of like to hear everyone's thus far experience with pair programming. Do they like it? They prefer working on their own and then meeting up afterwards? Anyone?
I think one interesting thing about doing it virtually has been that a lot of these elements have held true. So like there have been times with each person on the team where I've been the driver or the navigator. And one of the cool things about the virtual is there have also been times where we've talked through it and established what needs to happen, and then both people are simultaneously coding. So like someone will go handle like a form handler while someone else finishes like the minutia in the form. And like it's been really cool to see how seamlessly sometimes that happens, like without even talking about it. You'll land on what needs to happen, and then both people will be doing it. And I think that's really a cool bonus of the remote pair programming. And it's fun too to have had a chance to be the navigator and the driver. It's been really valuable.
Yeah, I think similar for me as well. As far as I've had the experience to be able to be both the driver and navigator, and then do the pair programming where we're both coding at the same time. And I feel like there's a pros and cons of each. Like for example, when we're both coding at the same time, like after, like I was thinking that I wish I would have been able to, Weston and I did this together, but I was wishing I had the opportunity to like look while he was programming or coding as well, so that I could see what he was working on, versus later me going back to read over the work that he had done. So I enjoyed like for us to both be able to code at the same time. I didn't feel as much pressure like while coding, because we were both working and I knew he wasn't just sitting there staring at what I was doing. So I enjoyed that. And then with like being the driver, Tina and I had the opportunity to do this together, and I felt like my brain was smoking, just because like as I was typing, and then like she was throwing out ideas of things to do as well. And then I don't know, after a while, I think it was just sensory overload, and I was like, okay, I need to take a step back and like process everything we've come up with, and then even the ideas while coding. And then this week I had the opportunity to be the navigator, which was pretty cool. But I don't know. I feel like I may have done it wrong just because I was like sitting back, like being the backseat driver, like telling, like directing Mariah as far as like, oh, you know, do this X, Y, and Z versus allowing her to code and then asking questions. So like now I feel as if going into it, next time I will shut up, close my mouth a little bit, allow, allow her to code and then be able to ask questions. But I also enjoyed that also, just because like while she was typing, I was able to like slow down and like think of the next step versus feeling like I need to get this right since I'm the person that's coding. So I don't know, there's pros and cons of each. I've enjoyed all of them, so I really don't have a preference either way as of now. But yeah.
Yeah, that's was actually really funny because the way that you mentioned that, Arnique, was how I learned to do pair programming was the driver just strictly would do the typing. They wanted the navigator to tell them what to type. So that's kind of the experience that we had this week. But I do find it more beneficial, I guess, when we're both kind of collaborating, maybe shooting ideas back and forth. If I'm driving, maybe I'll like type some code in, like, oh, what do you think about this? And then the navigator can be like, oh, you know, that makes sense. What if we tried this? And I feel like, I don't know, I like that collaboration style a little bit more for sure, but it's all learning experience and seeing what works best with you know, your team.
All right, anyone else before I slowly move on?
Sure.
Oh.
I can share my experience of what it's like to pair on my team. I think there's like similar flavors to this on our team. We don't do a whole lot of pair programming, at least for me, in comparison to when I was at boot camp. It was just a lot of pair programming every day. It was literally pair programming every day. At work, typically, like we have our tickets that are assigned and things like that. And we'll usually only pair program if someone runs into trouble somewhere. And so usually what'll happen is I'll probably hit up one of my seniors or one of my other coworkers. And what'll happen is I'll be the driver and I'll try to like explain and show them what I've done and stuff like that. But then they'll kind of ask some questions as we go along and troubleshoot, and I'll be typing in and sharing my screen. And so they'll kind of like ask me leading questions to where they think that the bug and stuff is. And so that's kind of the flavor that we have of pair programming at my work. The other flavor that usually happens to me is that I'm trying to troubleshoot something. I hit someone up, and the act of rubber ducking with them or like being the first part of the problem, and I'm like, oh, yeah, I got it. Okay, thank you for your 2 minutes. Bye. So that's kind of how pair programming works for us on our team. The other like kind of more code collaboration that we do tends to be less about actually writing the code and more about the architecture and the planning of what and how you're going to build something. So on our team, we emphasize a lot more kind of communication up front before the like actual shipping of the code part. So that's the only thing that's a little bit different. But yep.
Thank you everyone for, you know, for your stories and your experience. Kind of what, Jen used the word rubber ducking. If you're not familiar with the term, it's kind of explaining code of what you're doing to someone who doesn't know anything. Usually, from what I've been told, is they would have a rubber duck on their desk and they would talk to that duck in kind of explaining the duck, this is what you're trying to do, but you know, it's not working, but why? In my experience, it really works, but I like to bring in like an outsider. So in my Collab Lab experience, when we have hiccups and roadblocks, sometimes I would just kind of bring my husband, put him in the chair, and my Collabie team and partner and myself, we would go through the code, explaining to my husband. I mean, he's a developer, so he understands, but he doesn't know what we're doing, right? Like he's like, okay, I'm sitting here looking at it, and then we're like, yeah, see, this is a roadblock. So, and then my Collabie partner would explain the code, and then I would just kind of fill in the blanks as well. And it has worked, because halfway through we're like, oh, this is the problem. Yes, our code is doing like the computer's doing exactly what we're doing it. And we found out through that rubber duck, because we were explaining to my husband exactly what we want to do, but we, found out the solutions through that. So I know people have different versions of rubber ducky, but I think the original concept came from, having some sort of figurine or rubber ducky on your desk and explaining to that inanimate object of what you're trying to do or what you're even working on. And just talking out loud sometimes help with that. So that is kind of what rubber ducking is. If I'm incorrect, Jen, please hop in and let me know. But that's from my understanding of what the term rubber ducking is. And in case in our group, nobody was familiar with it. And pair programming, Ariko, I don't want you to like not say anything, right? Like it's just it depends on the person. You kind of got to feel if they like to be a little bit more, focus just on coding and likes the input of the direction, I think that's okay. Or, some people like, hey, let me handle this first. Let me show you what I'm trying to code. And then you could kind of like hop in and have that conversation of like, oh, that's cool. Can we try X, Y, and Z? So I don't want anyone in here like feel like, oh, I've been doing it wrong. In my heart, I don't think there's like a right and wrong way. It's kind of depending on the alternative partner and that collaboration, and get a feel of how they feel as well. And then these are links and to sites to learn more about pair programming. I believe Jen already posted all these awesome information in our Slack chat. So I think that's it. Any questions about pair programming or want to talk more about it?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. I've enjoyed it so much. I think that's been my favorite part so far of the Collab Lab experience. I mean, obviously everyone is great, but I think that's been my favorite part just because I've been able to learn so much. And it's like small things that I just didn't know, or maybe I missed it when we were going over it during my boot camp. And then I'm able to go back and like show or tell some of my friends from the boot camp about what I've learned. And they just think I'm a genius, although I'm just stealing stuff I've learned from here. So it's been great. I really enjoyed it.
Woohoo! Yay!
I think a lot
Yeah.
of workplaces actually don't really do as much programming, especially if you're from a bootcamp background. They emphasize it a lot, and I would say a lot of the people who are software engineers, and I talk to them, a lot of them, like, yeah, maybe they pair, they're not opposed to it, but the company doesn't really have a culture of pairing because everyone's just trying to ship their own code. And I think what I find is that a lot of collabies, they will kind of go into their job and kind of be shocked because all of our stuff is done pairing, or in boot camp, all of our stuff is done pairing, and it's not. But I think I would encourage you, if you enjoy pairing so much, wherever you end up working, one, it's either one of the questions that you ask during the job interviews and asking about what kind of mentorship there is at your next potential job, or two, being like, oh, if you don't pair, would you be open for me to like introduce pairing to the engineering kind of, what do you call it, the engineering department, and then could we try it out maybe on our small team or something like that, or like during orientation. So just know that even though if you are a junior, you're able to influence your culture depending on how like big or small like your company is. So that's always an option if you really enjoy pairing and it's not really a thing at your company currently or something like that.
Yeah, that's really cool. I guess I had a question that's related to that, Jennifer, or anyone. So like a lot of what we've been talking about is almost presupposing that you have an issue that you need help with. So you're kind of calling someone in. But I'm curious about the opposite of that. Like if there's someone who's really seasoned, or you find that you enjoy, like let's say that I'm a newbie on a team, but like I've connected with you, and I think, I value, the code that you've written and think it's really great. What about in like almost asking if you can shadow? So like asking if you can be the navigator, but more, rather than, it's more just to like see how you operate and how you approach things. And I'm just curious to know, like, in terms of mentorship, if that's something that ever happens.
Yeah, that's a really great idea. I personally haven't done that. So how that usually plays out for me is that if I have to eventually roll on to a project or things like that, I'll schedule time with someone to kind of walk through the code base with me, and occasionally maybe we'll walk through one of their PRs together. So we might not go the extra step of pairing, because our teams do pretty thorough code reviews. So that's almost our like replacement for pairing, if that makes sense. But definitely during the onboarding phase, there's a lot more. If like an engineer onboarded with us and they needed to onboard to my project and they said, hey, I really enjoy pairing. Could we just spend like a couple hours like jamming out on one of your tickets? And that's kind of sometimes we do that. And so that is definitely an option. And that's why I was trying to get at with my previous comment, is that sometimes teams, like, they just don't do it, so they don't think about it. But if you offer it as a, hey, this might be helpful for me, would you be willing to do this? Some people don't like to be watched, but other people are like very, very open to that. I know I would be very open to that. So there's always no harm in asking, kind of thing.
I think that's kind of what I did when I started my onboarding with the current company I'm working for. So since I'm very new to the field, I kind of reached out to some developers, and then I just kind of say, hey, I'm trying to get an understanding of how things work. Do you have time and the bandwidth to kind of show me the code and how it works? And I'll schedule like maybe a 45-minute time block, because I know everybody's busy working on their own ticket. So what I'm asking, it may stack on more time, and it prevents them from accomplishing that ticket. And I don't want to take up too much time. So, I'll, what we call ping them. I'll message them as like, hey, I would like to get a better understanding how the structure works, or I would like to see like, where do I go to, play around with the code, or X, Y, and Z. And then either they're like, yeah, sure. You could look at my calendar and find a time block that I'm open, or they'll be like, at this time I can't, and then I'll just kind of pop onto a different developer, and then they'll kind of, it's not quite pair programming, it's more of kind of like show and tell, like, this is kind of what we're working on, this is where the code lives, and this is the structure, this is the file format. And then I'm like, oh, okay. And then I take notes. And then with their permission, I'm more of a visual person, so I like to record the session. So I ask beforehand, like, hey, can I record it? So, as a reference when I go back to it. And then most likely they're like, yeah, that's totally fine. And then I'll record the session. And then I'll go back to it. So it's just kind of like, okay, this is where they went. Oh, that's how you get there. And so it's not quite pair programming, but I do reach out and say, hey, do you have the time? And I like to talk to different developers because everyone does things very differently. So it's not like one for all. I've talked to one developer, they like this particular IDE, and then I'll hop on a call with a totally different developer and they're like, yeah, I use this. I'm like, oh, I thought the whole team used this IDE, but this developer uses a different one, so, and it's kind of cool for them to show me, and usually it's been good. I haven't had any like negative impact of it. So, but I did that at the very beginning, after I was hired, at the beginning stages, like, hey, do you have the time, the bandwidth? I would love to see how things work. And I try not to take up too much time, maybe like, once, twice a week, less than an hour, because I know everybody's busy, and just demoing takes a lot of brain power too. So that is kind of how I've been trying to pair program in a sense with my work.
Yeah, the way it manifests too is you really have to go out there and ask. If you kind of walk in and expect it to be offered, it's probably, you're going to learn a lot less than unless you like go up and ask. So for me, in my personality, at first that was very scary, because I'm someone that'll be like, yeah, I'm just over here. You can help me out when you have the time. Okay, thanks. But like now I understand, like, everyone's busy, so you need to go ask. So
1,000 on that, or I'm pointing because Jen is on that side for me, but yes, I did the same thing. I kind of wait around, like, okay, they know I'm new, I just enter, so they'll like probably come up to me, like, I don't want to bother them. And then, you know, after a certain time frame, I'm like, oh boy, this is not going well, because I'm not really making much traction. So I have to do my due diligence and reach out. And it's like, for me, it's just like my heart is pounding. I'm like, okay, I gotta send this like message, like, can we, you know? And then once you do it a few times and over, it gets a little bit more comfortable. And then you could get an idea of how your teammate works. Some people are like, oh yeah, okay, this person is like really comfortable me reaching out randomly, right? And this person's like, oh, I kind of got the vibe that they prefer a little bit more structure, you know, and then I go a different route of reaching out. So, but yeah, definitely you will have to kind of go out that comfort zone of what I call it, keep poking them, asking for help, you know, because they will not come up to you. That is definitely one of the lessons I've learned as a newbie as well. All right, we got 10 minutes. I do really want to make sure I respect everyone's time. Before I move on though, any other questions? Because this is it's a good topic to talk about. Nope, nope. Okay, so I am going to share my screen again. And I would, or actually, sorry, I've been taking, Jen, do you want to do it? It's either or to assign the next 2 tasks.
Sure. Let me share my screen then. All right, let's see. Oh, hold on. Let me adjust my screen a little bit. Away from home, the setup is different. All right. So we have, let's go back to the Kanban board first. All right, so we have one that's ready for peer review. This technically already went through mentor review. I think Viet already approved this PR. So I think, yeah, whenever you're feeling better, don't worry about it.
I just did it this morning. So
okay.
it's pretty good now. Sorry about that.
No, you're totally fine. Real life happens. No worries. All right, so just wanted to make sure. Thank you so much again, everyone, for actually updating the tickets. It's really much appreciated. So now for this week, we're going to be tackling some new issues to continue to add functionality to our shopping list. So this week, let me see here. I might have to move your guys' faces. All right. So as a user, I want to see a welcoming prompt to add my first item if my list is empty to help me get oriented to how the app works. So this seems like there's a lot less acceptance criteria than the previous ones, but when a user starts a new list, they need a little guidance on how to get started. Think through what you'd want to see as a user and make some intentional user experience decisions that will guide our users in confidently adding their very first item. The list view, when there are no items to display, should prompt for the user to add their first item. This is the wireframe is a little short on the welcoming part of the story, but otherwise the functionality is complete for the purpose of the AC. So let's click on this wireframe. So you can see here that it says like the shopping list is empty. So kind of you can go ahead and ask them to add an item or maybe have a lengthier prompt to kind of guide the user into that you want them to add their first item. So this is the first issue. We'll talk about the second issue now. And by the way, typically when an issue is this light on acceptance criteria, you have a lot more room for creativity. So definitely go with your partner and kind of see where it takes you. But remember, still be mindful of kind of like, I don't like to say the time limit, but be mindful of kind of not taking on something that's too big. You can always ask mentors before you get started, if this idea is like too big or not, or like t-shirt sizing an idea. So number 8, as a user, I want to mark an item on my shopping list as purchased so the app can learn how often I buy different items. So users need a UI that allows them to mark that their items are purchased so they can track what on their list they do and do not need to buy. So this one has a few more acceptance criteria than the other one. So semantic label, for the list item component. Checking off the item in the UI also updates the date last purchased and total purchases property on the corresponding Firestore document. The item is shown as checked for 24 hours after the purchase is made. And after 24 hours, the item unchecks itself so the user can buy it again. And then the update item function in Firebase has been filled out and sends updates to the Firestore database when an item is checked or unchecked. So this will be a lot of backend functionality coupled with how to display this. Well, not necessarily display, but display just whether you bought the item or not. So while you'll need to update multiple parts of the Firestore document for this feature, do not worry about date next purchased yet. That will be added. Wait a second. Doesn't this directly contradict with itself? Anyways, you can use the Firestore console to test that this feature is working correctly by manipulating the value of date next purchased. Sorry, I misread that. Yeah, so the key here is that we have date last purchased and date next purchased. Do not worry about the next purchased because that will be a calculation that's handled in a separate issue. What we're really going to be focusing on is date last purchase. So it's essentially a timestamp of when you check the item. Make sense? All right, so let me go back. I believe if I go into project brief and we're on week 3. So the pairs, is it week 3 or week 4? Week 4, sorry, week 4.
I think, yeah.
Yeah, so we are on Tina and Mariah and Weston and Arniqua. I think we're back to the OG pairs from week 1. So we have issue 7 and issue 8. Any takers for issue 7? All right. I don't want to assign myself. I need to move your guys' faces over. Mariah. And it was Tina, right?
Yeah.
And then I forgot. All right. And then we got issue number 8. We have Weston. And I think it's A-Cole, right? Yeah, there we go. All right, we have everything assigned. Does anyone have any questions for the 2 issues that we just went over? Right now, we have a few more minutes, so I just want to make sure I catch any questions before moving on to anything else. All right, no questions. Well, if that's it, I'll stop sharing my screen. And then, Yolanda, you want to outro the recording? And then there's a couple minutes left. People can ask any other questions if they don't want to be recorded too.